How you doing, Rhonda? Are you recovering? Say hello to the people. Hello, Rhonda.
Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor, where Roger and I have returned for my weekly reading report. It's time for my weekly reading report, that spellbinding program where I talk about all the stuff that I read last week. All right, Roger, let's talk about it. And last week was tough. It was a tough week, but I managed to get a lot of reading done. Last week was tough because my little dog Rhonda had her fourth surgery. I think it's her fourth surgery she's had. And this time it was major surgery. She had a tumor removed from her liver, and so she's recovering from that. Thank goodness I have pet insurance. Otherwise, I would be broke. I would be broke. So thank goodness for pet insurance. It saved me and saved Rhonda. So she is recovering from that. But yeah, last week, man, was busy. Lots going on. But like I said, I did read some stuff somehow. So let's talk about the stuff I've read, the stuff I'm reading, and also I got a really cool thing in the mail that I want to talk about. So I'm going to pull out my list for the 500 book challenge, the challenge where I have to read 500 books that I own before I'll buy any new ones. Haven't bought any books in a while. So where were we at? Okay, book number 228 was this book. It's Doc Savage. This is Quest of the Spider. I finished this book. Quest of the Spider. Every month I'm reading a Doc Savage novel in the order that they originally appeared in Doc Savage magazine in the 1930s. And this was the third Doc Savage novel that was published. When was this published? I have it written down. It was published May of 1933. This was May of 1933. Quest of the Spider. This is, of course, the reprint from Bantam. Bantam had a very successful line of Doc Savage novels. This was an excellent Doc Savage adventure. Just pure pulp fun. It was very much of its time. It had a pretty standard masked pulp villain, criminal who would wear a mask and had a secret identity, the Gray Spider. And Doc Savage and his agents had to go up against him and had some very hair-raising adventures. It was great. It was great. Like I said, this is very much of its time. Now, you always kind of expect a little bit of period racism to show up in your pulp stories. And that happened a lot in Doc Savage. The period racism in this book was dialed up to 11. So, yeah, know that going in. But still, tremendous fun. I really enjoyed it. This was a good one. So, pulp adventure, Doc Savage. The Doc Savage stories are going along very well. And so I'm enjoying them tremendously. So yeah, Quest of the Spider, Doc Savage. I had a good time with that one. So that was number 228. Book 229. Can you believe that I finished it? I finished it. I finished it. So I completed this gigantic book, and I don't even know where to start talking about this book. So I'm going to have to think about this for a while. This deserves its own video, which I'll have up probably in a week or so. Much like after I finished The Stand, when I finished The Stand, I made a video on The Stand, which was like a half hour long, all about that book. And this deserves the same treatment, I think. I will say a few things about it after finishing the book. I have many conflicting feelings about this book. When I first read this as a teenager, I also had conflicting feelings. I don't think I liked it as much when I was a teenager as I did this time around. And some of the things, well, one particular thing, and you know what it is if you've read this book, there's one thing, one kind of controversial, scandalous thing that happens in this book that I remember really traumatizing me when I read it the first time, just thinking, what the hell? And I thought going into it this time, since I knew that that was coming, that it wouldn't bother me as much. It did. I could be even more traumatized this time reading it than I was the first time. And I was thinking, as I was, and it just kept going on, this thing. It just, and there was other stuff that was just like weird. It was like, what? And I was wondering what the hell is going on in Stephen King's brain, you know, when he was writing this book. I mean, so much of this book is really, really good. There's a lot of really, really good stuff in this book. And then there's stuff like that. And I couldn't figure it out. And then I remembered, cocaine. Cocaine was going on when he was writing this book. This was 1986, which was, I think, the same year Maximum Overdrive came out, right? That movie that Stephen King directed, which, thank goodness, is the only movie Stephen King directed. And he directed the whole thing completely stoned on cocaine. If you want to see something fun, look up the trailer for Maximum Overdrive when Stephen King, clearly stoned, is talking like a maniac about his movie, Maximum Overdrive. This was written around that time, so he was high, which makes it make a little bit more sense. He had some addiction issues, Stephen King. He drank excessively. I think he was giving up alcohol around this time, if I'm remembering right, but that just made him take more cocaine. And apparently he really loved cocaine, as many people did in the 1980s. And boy, does it show in this book. And I think that's where a lot of the weirdness and craziness came in this book. Because when this book ended, by the time it ended, there were some sloppy things. There were some really weird things. There were some scary things in this. But it was all kind of, like I said, I'm going to have more to say about this book. I just have to think about it and sit on it for a while. I do think it was altogether probably a better book than The Stand as a book. Although, I will say, I think The Stand earned its length. You know, The Stand was a giant book, and it kind of needed to be a giant book. And I think it worked better as a giant book than this one does. I don't think this needs to be nearly as long as it is. I think this is probably much too long for the story that it tells. The parts where the story that it tells when, you know, the Losers Club are children is so much more effective than the parts when they are adults. And then there's that one scene, though. Okay, so there's a lot of things I'm going to have to think about on this. You know, when I finished this on Goodreads, I think I gave it 4 stars. Again, Goodreads, because you have to give a star rating. Really, I couldn't give it 3 because the good stuff in here is really, really good. But then, is it really? You know, star ratings suck just because of that. Because you get books like this where it's just like, how do I even? So, yeah, in about a week or so, after I've sat on this in my brain for a while, I will give it more of a review. This is just me. I literally just finished this, and I don't know what to think of it. So, finally can put this down, and I'm going to be picking Varney the Vampire back up this week. And it'll be nice to get back to Varney. But, so that's what I finished. I did finish another book, though. I finished book number 230, which was Fantastic Four Marvel Masterworks. Which volume was it? Volume 21, which is mostly John Byrne stuff in the Marvel Masterworks. 21. Of course, I'm reading every issue of the Fantastic Four from the first run of the Fantastic Four, which ran from 1961 to 1996. And I'm reading it every way I can. And I've got a lot of, at this particular period, I've got a lot of these stories in Marvel Masterworks. And in 21, it was mostly John Byrne stuff, which is great. John Byrne was wonderful on the Fantastic Four. And all of these stories in this volume from John Byrne are really, really good. But it ended with the Fantastic Four Roast, which was a humorous one-shot that was put out to honor the anniversary, the 20th anniversary of the Fantastic Four. And like most comic book attempts at humor, it was painful to read. It was not funny. And unfortunately, that's Hembeck, I think, who did the cover. Unfortunately, he doesn't do if he did the artwork throughout the whole thing, it would be more entertaining, but he doesn't. Great cover though. This is a great cover, and it's a wraparound cover, so it goes all the way around with all of these Marvel characters. Great cover, man. I have to say that, even though the book itself was not funny. There was one funny moment. I think there was one funny moment, which was when the Golden Age hero, the Wizard, had to go up to go pee. And that was it. That was the only funny thing. And that was only funny by comparison, really. This was pretty bad. And so now I'm on volume 22. And the next issue I'll be reading, let me see if I can get to it, is issue 241. Issue 241 is the issue I will be reading today. So there's that. That was not the only thing, though, comic book wise, that I've been reading. I'll get to that in a minute. I am reading another book, though, and that is this one. This is The Lone Ranger. The Lone Ranger. So this is the first novel of The Lone Ranger, which was reprinted back in the early 80s. I think it was, 1980 when this was published? No, it's before that. It's this one's from 1978, it looks like. Anyway, it was before the Lone Ranger movie came out. And so they reprinted all of these old Lone Ranger novels in a series of paperbacks. And my good friend Steve Donahue found a bunch of these Lone Ranger paperbacks at the Brattle and sent them to me, which is wonderful. I love the Lone Ranger. I used to watch that television show all the time. And I also listened to some of the radio show episodes of the Lone Ranger. And Fran Stryker wrote a lot of those radio show episodes. And I just started this book. It's interesting in that it's not an origin of the Lone Ranger. At the start of this book, the Lone Ranger's already been working for years and years. But it is an origin story for Silver, his horse. And so that's interesting, and it's kind of cool. I haven't got very far in it so far. I'm only at page 32, so I could talk more about this book next week. An interesting thing is, though, that I was told that this book was not written by Fran Stryker. I think the other books in the series are, but though it has its name on it, it was really written by, apparently, and if somebody knows better, and if this is wrong, let me know, but it sounds like Gaylord Dubois wrote this book. What's interesting about that is that he wrote like a million comic books. He wrote Tarzan comic books forever, and he wrote The Space Family Robinson, and I think he also did Turok, Son of Stone. And so it's interesting that he actually wrote this book, if he actually wrote it, and let me know if that's true or not. It doesn't say anywhere on this copy whether that's true, but that's what I heard. But so far, good book, and I'll tell you more about this book next week. Like I said, loved The Lone Ranger when I was a kid. Used to watch that show all the time. You know, they reran a bunch of cool television shows when I was a kid, and that was one of them. So reading that, and I'm also reading something I've been meaning to read forever, which is The Spirit by Will Eisner. So this is the only comic that I have of The Spirit, and this is the best of The Spirit, which was published in the 2000s, the mid-2000s. When was this published? This was published by DC Comics. And it was published when? 2005? Yeah, 2005, it looks like. So this was published in 2005, The Best of The Spirit. And The Spirit, a comic by Will Eisner, which is tremendously highly regarded and famous, was originally apparently a weekly newspaper insert. You would find it in a newspaper every week and read the adventures of the Spirit. And this was serialized weekly or published weekly for 15 years, I think. Mostly done by Will Eisner, although he did sometimes have other people write it and other people draw it. I think especially when he was off fighting during World War II. I never read any of The Spirit because I could never find anything from The Spirit. Even though I always heard about this, this was hard to find, Spirit stories. And so when I saw this book published, I picked it right up and never read it. DC Comics did publish, I think, the entire run of The Spirit in archive editions, the Spirit Archives. I do not have any of those books, unfortunately. But I have this. So I thought, you know what? I'm finally going to read The Spirit. And I'm that far. I'm almost finished with it. I wanted to read it because, I wanted to finally experience these stories, and I will talk about them on a future Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Probably not this Wednesday, but some Wednesday in the near future, I'll be talking about these because, wow, I am so very impressed by these stories. You often hear that these stories are ahead of their time, and that is very true. They're just so interesting and unique, and the artwork is just amazing. Just amazing. It's kind of comical, cartoony art, but also tremendously detailed. And it's just, the artwork is just incredible. It's incredible. And so I can't believe I've never read this stuff before. I can't believe it because, this stuff, like I said, has been pretty hard to find, but just the quality of the work itself is pretty amazing. This is amazing stuff. And this apparently is the best of The Spirit. It has the Spirit's origin story, which is very different than the rest of the stories in the book. So originally The Spirit was a detective and criminologist named Denny Colt. He was Denny Colt. And he goes up against this villain, and he's sprayed with this chemical which puts him in suspended animation. And everybody thinks Denny Colt is dead. And then he wakes up in the graveyard and crawls out of his grave and decides to fight crime as the Spirit, this guy. And he'll go by the name of the Spirit, and he'll wear this mask so nobody knows who he is, even though he's clearly Denny Colt, because he's doing the exact same thing he did before he became the Spirit. He looks exactly like Denny Colt. He hangs out with the police commissioner, who is the only person who knows who he really is, because he's clearly Denny Colt, who was friends with the police commissioner before he became the Spirit. And so the character of the Spirit is kind of hilarious as far as that goes. He's doing the same thing he did before. He wears this little mask, and everybody's like, oh, wait, it's the Spirit. It's no big deal that the Spirit's around. He always worked with the cops. Originally, he became the Spirit because he could capture criminals and go after criminals in a way that the law couldn't. But really, he's just a private detective who works with the cops once in a while. That's all he is. He's a private detective with a mask. And And most of the stories are not about the spirit. The spirit is in the stories, but the stories are usually about the characters, but about other characters, the criminals, and these are crime stories mostly, although they're very bizarre crime stories frequently. They're stories about people. They're stories about human beings, and the spirit happens to be in them. Now I am reading The Best of the Spirit. So this is a handpicked selection of these stories. So maybe I would get a better sense of this character if I read all of the stories. But like I said, he just seems to be a private detective with a mask. And anybody who looked at him would know who he was. Because like I said, he's doing the same thing he did before. So it's great though. It lives up to the hype, I think. Some of these stories that originally appeared in the mid to late 40s after Eisner got back from the war are just terrific. And so I'm looking forward to reading the rest of this. I've got just a few stories left. I wish I had more of the spirit because it's that good, but I don't. But I will talk more about this on a future Epic Comic Book Wednesday. But I'm loving this stuff. This stuff's great. I have read other Eisner stuff he did years later, like his early graphic novel stuff. And that was tremendous. So I'm not really surprised that this is as good as it is, but still, it's really impressive stuff. So yeah, the spirit, it's fantastic. So there's that. I did get something in the mail from another YouTube channel, another booktube channel that you should check out, Infinite Text. Fantastic channel. And she sent me this, Black Volmea's Vengeance. She did a review of this. I'll link the channel down below. And about a month ago, I think she did a review of this book, Black Volmea's Vengeance by Robert E. Howard, Pirate Stories from Robert E. Howard. These are fantastic. These old Donald Grant volumes. This was published by Donald M. Grant back in 1976. This was reprinted as a paperback, so it has 3 of Robert E. Howard's best pirate stories in this volume. I have the paperback, but it's wonderful to have this original Grant edition. I don't have too many of the Grant editions, but I have some of them. And it's got wonderful illustrations in this volume. Who did the illustrations in this? It was Robert James Palethorpe, and he did just a great job on the illustrations in this. Let's see if I can find another one. Look at that. Look at that. That's fantastic. This is a beautiful, beautiful volume. Thank you very much, Infinite Text, for sending this to me. It's wonderful. I love this. This is fantastic. Of course, Robert E. Howard, greatest pulp writer who ever lived. And he did some fantastic pirate stories. And that's what this is. Go check out that channel. Like I said, link down below. I should probably shut up because I've gone on for 23 minutes. Okay, everybody. I will catch you next time.